Escape from the Philippines. The ocean was a black abyss, the kind that swallowed ships and souls alike. The rain lashed against my face, stinging like 1,000 needles, while the wind howled through the jagged cliffs of Corregidor, a ghostly wail that carried with it the voices of the dead. I remember gripping the wooden oar so tightly my knuckles turned white, my breath ragged from exhaustion. We weren't just fighting against the storm, we were fighting against time itself. And time, as we had learned, was merciless. A week earlier, I had still been inside Malinta Tunnel, a suffocating labyrinth of concrete and darkness carved into the guts of Corregidor Island. The air reeked of sweat, rot, and something else, fear. Real fear. The kind that turns men into ghosts before they're even dead. We had held out for months, waiting for supplies, reinforcements, a miracle, any damn thing that would turn the tide. But the tide was against us. The Japs had tightened the noose. Their artillery never stopped, shells screaming through the sky before slamming into what was left of the island. We barely had time to breathe between the bombardments. Dirt rained from the tunnel ceilings, fine dust coating our tongues, turning every breath into something dry and bitter. Our food was gone, our water rationed to the point where even swallowing felt like a waste. I had seen men die in ways that would keep me up at night for the rest of my life. Some went down fighting, bodies torn apart by shrapnel, before they even had the chance to scream. Others, too many, went down in silence, their ribs poking through skin, their eyes hollow, nothing left of them but a slow, shivering breath that faded into nothing. I wasn't a hero. Never had been. And I sure as hell wasn't going to be one now. I wanted to live. Maybe that made me a coward, but cowards, at the very least, got to see another sunrise. That's why, when I heard whispers of an escape, I listened. The plan was madness. Suicidal. A handful of us would take a small boat and push off into the open sea, praying the Japanese patrols didn't spot us. If they did, well, that would be the end of it. No surrender, no prisoner of war camps. Just bullets, blood, and a quick trip to the ocean floor. I didn't hesitate. Maybe I should have, but hesitation was for men who still had the luxury of choice. That night, the island was lit up by fires burning in the wreckage of our last strongholds. Shadows twisted and danced across the jungle, flickering against the jagged rocks. We moved like ghosts, clinging to the darkness, knowing that one misstep meant death. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would give me away. Then we saw it, our salvation. A wooden fishing boat, barely big enough for the 5 of us, bobbing in the shallow waters. The tide had pulled it in close, almost like it was waiting for us. I remember thinking that was a bad sign. Still, we climbed aboard, our fingers numb against the wetwood. The ocean was vast, an endless black maw that stretched beyond the reach of our eyes. We pushed off, the sound of water slapping against the hull barely audible over the distant explosions. For a moment, just a moment, I thought we might actually make it. Then the first spotlight cut through the darkness. The light sliced through the night like a blade, cutting across the waves, searching. My breath caught in my throat as the beam skimmed over our boat, missing us by inches. We froze. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. A heartbeat passed, then another. The light drifted away, sweeping the shoreline instead. My fingers tightened around the edge of the boat, nails digging into the damp wood. We weren't safe. Not yet. The wind had picked up, pushing us farther from the island, but that was both a blessing and a curse. The farther we drifted, the more open we became. No cover. No chance to hide if they spotted us. I could barely make out the others, just shadowed figures huddled together, soaked and silent. Somewhere behind me, Dawson was muttering something under his breath, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. I wasn't sure it would make a difference. A crack echoed through the night. Gunfire. I flinched, instinctively ducking, my hands gripping the side of the boat as though they could somehow shield me from a bullet. Another shot. This time, I saw the splash in the water too close. My stomach twisted. They'd seen us. Row, someone hissed. Nobody needed to be told twice. The oars hit the water in unison, muscles straining, the sound of our panic splashing drowned out by the rising wind. My arms burned with every stroke, but I didn't stop. None of us did. The ocean was rough, waves tossing us like a toy in a child's hand. Salt sprayed into my face, burning my eyes, filling my mouth. I spat it out and kept rowing. A flare burst into the sky behind us, turning the night blood red. Corregidor was still burning. From out here, it looked like a funeral pyre. Maybe it was. We weren't the only ones trying to escape. I could hear other boats, scattered in the darkness, the desperate splashes of men clawing their way to freedom. Some of them wouldn't make it. Maybe none of us would. A wave slammed into us, nearly capsizing the boat. Someone shouted, "Dawson, I think." His voice barely reached me over the wind. We weren't just fighting the Japanese anymore. We were fighting the sea itself. Then, through the chaos, I heard something worse. An engine. The low, guttural growl of a patrol boat. My stomach dropped. The Japs weren't just firing blindly from shore. They were coming for us. I twisted around, my breath shallow, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the darkness, I could just make out the outline of the vessel, cutting through the waves like a predator on the hunt. The searchlight snapped on, sweeping the water in wide arcs. If they saw us, it was over. We had two choices: keep rowing and hope we were faster, or ditch the boat and take our chances in the water. Neither option felt like survival. The others were looking at me now, their eyes wild, waiting. I didn't know why. I wasn't a leader. I was just another scared man trying to outrun death. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Overboard, I whispered. No hesitation. No time to argue. The first splash barely registered before I followed, the cold biting into my skin like 1,000 needles. The ocean swallowed me whole. I kicked hard, forcing myself deeper, lungs screaming. Above me, the searchlight passed over the empty boat. Then another burst of gunfire. The wood splintered apart, fragments raining down into the water. I stayed under as long as I could. Too long. My chest burned, my body screaming for air. When I finally surfaced, I barely made a sound. Just a gasp, quick and quiet. The patrol boat was still there, but they were moving on. Searching. Hunting. The others surfaced nearby, barely more than shadows in the waves. None of us spoke. There was nothing to say. The wreckage of our boat drifted, carried by the tide. Our one chance at escape gone. We were alone now, in the middle of the sea, with nothing but darkness stretching in every direction. The ocean was vast, endless in its hunger. The patrol boat had moved on, its searchlight fading into the distance, but that didn't mean we were safe. Far from it. We were stranded in open water, miles from land, with no food, no fresh water, and nothing to keep us afloat but our own fading strength. The first hour was the worst. The adrenaline had carried us this far, but now reality was sinking in, heavier than the sea itself. My arms burned from the rowing, my legs ached from treading water, and the salt had already begun to crack my lips. I could hear the others breathing, ragged, uneven gasps. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. Dawson was the first to break the silence. Which way? His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. A good question. One I didn't have an answer for. The stars were out, but I had no idea how to read them. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the war was still raging. The Japanese owned these waters now. We couldn't swim back to Corregidor. That was a death sentence. And Bataan had already fallen. The only hope was reaching one of the smaller islands, something unoccupied, somewhere we could hide. If we didn't drown first. Currents pulling west, I muttered. We go with it. Nobody argued. We had no better plan. The next few hours blurred into one long, aching nightmare. The sea was cold, but not enough to kill us, not yet. It was the exhaustion that would do it first. I tried not to think about what lurked below. The stories we had heard, the sharks drawn to blood, to weakness. I kept my legs moving, my arms pushing through the water. Just keep going. Just keep moving. I don't know how long we swam. Time had lost all meaning, replaced by the burning in my muscles, the salt scraping my throat raw. I kept my head up, scanning the darkness, searching for anything. Then finally I saw it. A shape against the horizon, barely visible in the faint moonlight. Land. It was still far too far, but it was there. I tried to shout, but my voice was gone, lost somewhere in the hours of silence. Instead, I just pointed. Dawson saw it too. He grunted, forcing his body forward with renewed desperation. Hope is a strange thing. It can keep a man alive just as easily as it can get him killed. The waves grew rougher as we got closer, the ocean dragging us back, fighting us with every stroke. My limbs felt like lead. My vision blurred. I had stopped feeling the cold. That was bad. That was dangerous. Then I heard a sound. Not the wind. Not the waves. A boat. Not a patrol boat. Something smaller. Wooden. Fishermen. Filipinos. They had seen us. One of them shouted, pointing, and then blessedly, miraculously, they turned toward us. The next few minutes were a haze. Strong hands grabbed me, pulling me up, rolling me onto the deck. I coughed up seawater, gasping, my body shivering violently. Around me, the others collapsed, too weak to move. Voices murmured in Tagalog, urgent and hushed. I tried to speak, but my lips wouldn't form the words. One of the fishermen knelt beside me, his face lined with worry. He pressed a flask to my lips. Fresh water. I drank greedily, not caring if it made me sick. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe we might live. But survival is never that simple. Because as the sun began to rise, casting its first golden light over the ocean, I saw something that turned my stomach to ice. Smoke. Not from Corregidor. Not from the battle. From the island ahead. The Japanese were already there, and we had just escaped one death, only to sail straight into another. The sight of smoke on the horizon turned my stomach into a knot of ice. My body had barely begun to thaw from the night spent in the open sea, but now a different kind of cold spread through me, the kind that had nothing to do with the wind or water. The island ahead wasn't empty. The Japanese were already there. Dawson must have seen it too. He pushed himself up on weak arms, his face pale beneath the layer of salt and exhaustion. "We gotta turn back," he rasped, but even as he said it, we both knew it wasn't an option. The sea had nearly killed us once. We wouldn't survive another night in it. The fishermen spoke in hushed voices, their expressions grim. They knew what that smoke meant. The war had reached them too. One of them, an older man with a face like weathered leather, looked at me and shook his head. "No choice," he said in heavily accented English. "We go. Straight toward the enemy?" It sounded like suicide. But what was the alternative? Drift until thirst or exhaustion took us. The boat kept moving. No one argued. We were past the point of argument. The closer we got, the clearer the island became. Lush jungle pressing against a white sand shore, the thick canopy broken only by a thin column of smoke curling into the morning sky. It wasn't the hungry, choking smoke of artillery fire. This was different. Controlled. A campfire. A Japanese encampment. A village under occupation. I had no idea, and we were running out of time to figure it out. The fishermen guided the boat around a rocky outcrop, keeping to the shallows. As we neared the shore, one of them pressed a finger to his lips. Quiet. No sudden moves. We slipped into the water, wading onto the beach, our legs like dead weight beneath us. The fishermen stayed with the boat, ready to disappear at the first sign of trouble. I didn't blame them. This wasn't their war. The jungle swallowed us whole. The air was thick, damp, filled with the buzzing of unseen insects. Every step was agony. My boots were soaked, my body screaming for rest, but stopping wasn't an option. Then I heard it. A voice. Not Japanese. English. We dropped low, pressing ourselves into the undergrowth. I strained to listen. The voice was rough, hushed, but unmistakably American. I crept forward, heart pounding. Through the leaves, I saw them. Two men, ragged, filthy. Their uniforms were stained, their bodies thin, their faces sunken with hunger. Survivors. Dawson exhaled sharply behind me. I could feel the weight of his thoughts. If there were survivors here, that meant the Japanese were too. One of the men turned, and my breath caught in my throat. I knew that face. Private First Class Henry Tate. I had watched him die on Bataan. Or at least, I thought I had. For a moment, my body refused to move. My brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Henry Tate had been in the last defensive line at Bataan, holding the road while the rest of us fell back. The Japs had shelled them to hell and back. I had seen the wreckage myself. Burnout trucks, bodies torn apart by shrapnel. No survivors. And yet, here he was. He looked up, eyes darting through the jungle, and then they locked onto me. His face went pale, like he was seeing a ghost. Maybe we both were. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then, finally, Bill. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was still catching up. Dawson stepped forward first, whispering harshly, "The hell is going on, Tate?" Tate hesitated. Then, with a glance toward his companion, a gaunt, hollow-eyed man I didn't recognize, he motioned for us to follow. We moved deeper into the jungle, keeping low. Every step felt unreal, like walking in a dream or a nightmare. Finally, we reached a small clearing, a makeshift camp, a few scavenged supplies, a tarp strung between two trees, barely enough to survive. Tate crouched beside the fire, his fingers twitching. He looked at me again, like he still wasn't sure I was real. "I saw you die," I said finally. My voice was rough, scraped raw by salt and exhaustion. Tate exhaled, running a hand through his matted hair. "I saw you die too." Silence. The other man, the one who had been with him, shifted uncomfortably. Tate glanced at him, then back at me. "We were captured," he said finally. "But then, you know what happened there?" I did. Tens of thousands of American and Filipino troops taken prisoner marched to their deaths in what would later be called the Bataan Death March. Those who survived the march ended up in hellish prison camps. Tate swallowed hard. "We escaped." I waited for him to say more, but he didn't. His eyes flickered to Dawson, then back to me. There was something he wasn't saying. "How?" I asked. The other man, the gaunt one, spoke for the first time. His voice was strange, hollow. "We didn't." A chill ran down my spine. Tate's hands clenched into fists. His knuckles were white, his breathing shallow. Dawson shifted beside me, uneasy. "The hell does that mean?" Tate looked at me again, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes I couldn't explain. Not fear, not relief, something else. "You left us," he whispered. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I shook my head. "No." But I couldn't finish the sentence. Because the truth was, I had left. We all had. When Bataan fell, those of us on Corregidor had told ourselves there was nothing we could do. We had been cut off. No reinforcements. No way to help. So we had stayed on our island, waiting for our own inevitable end. Tate's lip curled. "You got to hide in your tunnels." We marched. His voice turned sharp. "Do you know what that was like?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The jungle pressed in around us, thick and suffocating. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. Then Tate exhaled, the tension in his body loosening just slightly. "We need to move," he said. "The Japs patrol this area." I nodded. Whatever this was, whatever strange ghosts haunted this island, I didn't have time to dwell on them now. But as we moved deeper into the jungle, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Tate's companion never blinked. And when I looked back at the campfire, there were no footprints in the dirt. Only ours.